We're happy to have you with us to have a bit of conversation and learning around the national and regional initiative called 2035. So we'll let Kathy start our time off together and then we'll dive in.
Great. And I'm actually going to start sharing. There's a lot of slides. Just a warning for you all. We'll have conversation as well, but we do have quite a few slides. Hopefully, it'll be easy for you to see them online. But let's get that started while we're
I think it's actually
here.
easier online than in person as far as the slides go.
Nice. All right. So again, welcome. For folks that don't know me, my name is Kathy Davies, and I work as a regional minister. I live in the Okanagan and work with the Okanagan congregations as well as team lead with all the regional ministers. And I've been doing a deeper dive into this 2035. So glad to share some of the things we're learning about that. I think we need to mute here. All right, excellent. And before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we are on sacred land in all the places that we gather. Pacific Mountain Regional Council and our communities of faith and buildings are situated across the traditional, ancestral, and treaty territories of more than 350 Indigenous communities across BC and the Yukon. And as we come from the Pacific Mountain office, we want to respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered today on Zoom from the office, which is situated on the unceded and ancestral lands of the Coast Salish Nations, of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish, who have occupied this land since time immemorial. It's our prayer that we may continue to work towards just and right relations here and throughout the areas from which we have come. And as we acknowledge our gathering on sacred land as well, we want to ground this conversation in prayer. And so as people of faith, we begin by grounding ourselves in your presence, O God, the one who is already here, who is still at work among us. We come from many communities, bringing both challenges that we carry and the signs of life that we are seeing. And as we listen and imagine together, give us wisdom, openness, and trust in one another, and root us in the deep hope that you are not finished with your church. May it be so. And
So I guess I shouldn't assume that everybody knows who I am. I'm Trina Duncan, the Executive Minister for Pacific Mountain and Chinook Winds regions, and happy to be with you today. Some of you may have already encountered this work quite a bit, and for some of you, this may be your first time that you're encountering this information. But whether it's new to you or whether it's really familiar, I really want to invite you into a time of dreaming and discerning. And really, this is a call for us to act with courage, with clarity, and with faith. Last year we just had our centennial, and I was part of a lot of the centennial celebrations. And as I was engaging with that and then later thinking about this work, I've been finding myself reflecting quite a bit on what it must have been like for those early church leaders to imagine a bold new vision for the future, and for what was then a brand new denomination. When you think about the scope of change that they were engaging in, it's really quite momentous. Church mergers, church closures, the challenge of too many buildings in too many neighborhoods. And I'm just so amazed by the courage and faith that they walked into the future with to build something new. And that dream shaped the church for the next 100 years and helped give us our sense of purpose from 1925 forward. And it feels like we're in one of those moments now. The world has changed so much, and the question that we're struggling with, working with, is what are our dreams and visions for the future now? The church has changed. Our churches are no longer bursting at the seams. There's people trying to imagine new things, but there's also a lot of us who are longing for the good old days. But the question today isn't how do we rebuild what we once had, because it turns out the good old days were just the old days. What kind of church do we need now? What kind of church does Canada need in 2035 and beyond 2035? And what shape must we take in order to be faithful in this time, not just for our own survival, but for the sake of the gospel? What shape must we take? Gives you a little window into the general meeting theme for those of you in Pacific Mountain region, the shape of hope. Because that's what the call is, to hope and to plan and to build a future. So Toward 2035 has emerged from that question. So in late 2024, there was a meeting that took place in Toronto with the senior leadership team from the General Council office and all of the regional executive ministers. And we sat together to take a look at where we were. We were given a bunch of data, which we're going to share with you today. And we brought, along with that data, we brought our experience of the church and, most importantly, our love for the church. So the data is pretty sobering. And it opens our eyes to some hard truths and some really big questions. What is the likely future of the church if we simply continue on the current path? So the information and the data that we're going to share with you shows projections into the future based on the algorithms of the data that we have. If we change nothing, what is the likely future of the church going to be? What would it take to shift that? And then how do we lead with faith into the what's next? And how do we avoid fear stopping us from leading? So we're going to just kick off our time with a video from the moderator who is introducing this 2035 project.
1 second. I'm just going to put it. Macy and I did try it, so we're going to make sure this works. There we go.
In the book of Isaiah, God speaks through the prophet to a people living in unimaginable circumstances. They were struggling to imagine what the future might hold. And yet God says, I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Toward 2035 begins with this same belief that God is doing a new thing. And the question before us is, can we perceive it? We know the numbers. Involvement in the United Church is significantly less than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And many of us are tired, worn out, discouraged. But Toward 2035 is not about despair. It's about choosing hope. It's about choosing to see the new thing that God is doing. It's about continuing the story of Jesus, loving what he loved, living what he taught, and being faithful servants of God in our time and place. Our world needs this church. In the middle of loneliness, injustice, and fear, we respond with resilient hope. We dare to imagine a united church made up of communities of disciples, rural and urban, coast to coast to coast, embodying Christ's presence in our neighborhoods. We know we'll need to be different. We'll need to let go. We'll need to do hard things. But we won't be doing them alone. God will give us what we need. So let's begin with prayer.
I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. When we hear this passage from Isaiah, it's tempting to imagine it as a promise of comfort, that God will somehow restore things to the way they once were. But that's not actually what Isaiah is saying. It's not, I will rebuild what you remember. God says, I am about to do a new thing. And that new thing is not always immediately obvious. Isaiah says it springs forth quietly, sometimes beneath the surface, and sometimes in places that we're not even looking. So, for the people of Israel, these words were spoken at a time when their world had been turned upside down. The institutions they trusted were gone, the future felt uncertain, and yet the prophet invites them to look again, not only at what has been lost, but at what God is beginning. So I think that's what the invitation for us is right now. If we only look for the church as it once was, we may miss what God is already bringing to life among us. The question Isaiah asked isn't, can God do something new? The question is, do you perceive it? Where do you see the small sprigs of life that are already emerging? Where do you see the Spirit already at work? Sometimes beyond our plans and sometimes beyond our walls. Because the promise of Isaiah is this: even in the wilderness, even in the desert, God is still making a way. The vision of the church in the 60s was that we have a church in every high school catchment area. I'm sure you've heard of that. So the question now is, what is the call? What do we need? Where do we need churches? How do we ensure those churches are serving the call? I was in a conversation with someone a little while ago, and we were talking about this 2035 project, and I made a comment about how the church is changing so much and society is different than it once was, especially with respect to its relationship to the church. And I made the comment that we've kind of been pushed to the edges. And I didn't really mean that in a positive way. And they misheard me and said, they thought I had said, we want to be on the edges. And I went to correct them, but then I thought to myself, well, you know what? Maybe that's actually true. I mean, isn't that where most of Jesus' ministry was, on the edges? So I've actually been quite thoughtful about that comment. Maybe this isn't something that's actually happening to us, but maybe this is the thing we're actually being called to. What if this is actually where we want to be? So I'm wondering if you feel a little bit the same way, that we're a bit on the edge. And so I'm going to invite us to take a moment in small groups to think about that. Where are you living out ministry on the edge? Where are you seeing those green shoots? What's happening? Who's there? And what did and does it feel like? So Mauricio, I'm going to ask us to go into small groups and maybe we'll just take like 5 minutes. So groups 4 or 5. Mauricio's just getting the groups ready, so you'll have to accept your request.
And I'll put the question out to the small groups as well.
This meeting is being recorded.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back, everyone. Does anybody have anything they would like to share from that reflection? You can raise your hand or you can put something in the chat. You have to raise your hand virtually in order for you to pop up on my screen. While people are thinking about that, just to note that we are recording this and we'll make it available to folks who were not able to be here after the fact. Being inspired by some of the new things that are emerging. Great. Ralph?
Well, you knew I'd raise my hand, didn't you? I'm just one of
I
those
can always
people.
count on you to break the silence.
Yeah. Anyway, so it was interesting that we had we didn't get to listen to everybody. We had a little bit of technical problems, but the thing was, I'll tell you what I got out of it is that I think that we're enthused enough to get going with whatever sort of comes our way. It's not like a dire situation or anything like that, but I felt a tone of optimism. Recognizing really being real about it. We know that we're sort of like on the edge somewhere, but I think there's a group of people, at least that we were with, that seem to be okay, throw it at us. And I have to say that well, Lynn's here sitting beside me, and I know that from our congregation, we're ready. We've done visioning, we've done this, we've done that. Now it sort of comes into strategic plans or something like that, but we're not good at that.
Yeah. I think that's been my experience around the region. We've been doing these workshops. I think this is our 8th one, and really there is a thread of hope and excitement about the future that we're hearing in these conversations, which I think is, well, I mean, it's the whole point, but also really exciting. Great. Well, thanks. So what I'm going to do is move us into the data a little bit. But I want to preface it with a couple of comments. First of all, this isn't predicting the future. So this isn't saying what the future is going to be. It's saying what it will be if we don't change anything. It's also not about defending the past. The past, the ministry that we've been doing is the ministry that we've been called to. It's not about shame, but it's about sparking imagination and encouraging us in the future. So It's about agency. What is our agency? What are the things that we actually can do and the things that we can change? It's not about closure. It's not about the region wanting to make decisions about what churches do close. It's about giving communities of faith agency around their own future and the region being here to support that future. So here's what I want to say really clearly. This is not predicting the end of the church or about the end of the church, but it's a signal that it may be the end of the church as we know it, and that we have to create and build a new church for the future. And so that's exciting and filled with opportunity. So what we're going to do now is talk about the data from the perspective of all of Canada. And then Kathy's going to break it out more with respect to the data relating to British Columbia and Pacific Mountain region in particular. So I'm first going to look at just religion in Canada in general, and this is in 1991. So in 1991, 49% of the population reported on their census. I guess everybody will have been doing this last week, and you all wrote in United Church of Canada. But here, 49% indicated Catholic, 12% indicated United, 9% Anglican, 3% Presbyterian and Lutheran, 7% other Christians. So this is where you'll see the evangelical denominations being reflected, and then 4% showed other faiths. The next slide is going to show us Canada in 2021. And this is showing a decline in Catholic to 33%. And United have gone from 11% to 4%. So pretty significant drop reporting there. 3% for the Anglicans, 1% for Lutheran Presbyterian, and 6% for other Christians. So the narrative is often that evangelical churches are growing, but you can see here that that number is also declining. What is growing is 13% other faiths, which is probably largely due to immigration. And then, of course, the most notable number is that 39% that is reflecting no religion. So that is a really significant number, and sort of indicating what we're seeing in the kind of societal changes that are being reflected. This is just the same data in a different format. So again, you can see the steep trajectory of people reporting no religion, and not so steep, but still increase around other faiths and decline in the mainstream denominations. So now we're looking at total membership. So this is across Canada. In 1992, 767,000 members. It's dropped down in 2023 to 321,000 members. And then 2035, we're at 11,000. So again, this is using the algorithm and is just showing what the projected numbers will be if nothing changes. And some of you may have seen these numbers at the annual meeting. Average Sunday worship attendance, 325,000 roughly in 1992, 111,000 in 2023, and projected to only 8,000 people at worship in 2035. So you're seeing the same trajectory on all of the slides. This one is a little steeper than others. Total identifiable givers, 405,000 in 1992, steep drop to 150,000 in 2023, and then projecting 47,000 givers in 2035. This is where we're seeing the steepest drop is participants in Sunday school. So 185,000 in 1992, 18,000 in 2023, and then projected 2,500 in 2035. But if you do the math, total number of people showing up on Sunday compared to this, it would be probably suggesting that this number even is a little aggressive. So it's probably likely even lower than that. If you have questions as I'm going along, feel free to raise them. This is number of pastoral charges. So 1992, 2,423 pastoral charges. In 2023, we were down to 1,976 pastoral charges, and then 2035, 1,633. So what that's showing us is that churches aren't closing as fast as the numbers are dropping. So this is indicating that we would have a lot of small churches that are reflecting really little numbers of participants. Now we're looking at deficit versus surplus. So the shaded number is the percentage with, or sorry, 11% with deficit in 1992, which is the solid number, and 44% in 2023, and 61% in 2035. So again, that solid number is increasing kind of at the same trajectory as some of the other numbers. Now we're looking at communities of faith that are served by ministry personnel. So in 1992, there were 1,868 full-time ministers, 162 in part-time, and 389 with no ministry personnel. In 2023, 683 were full-time, 441 part-time, and around 1,100 with no ministry personnel. And then projecting for 2035, only 89 full-time ministry personnel across Canada, 459 part-time ministry personnel, and 1,123 with no ministry personnel. The part-time ministry personnel and no ministry personnel are kind of holding steady for 2023 to 2035, but the numbers that are going from, like, there's generally what happens is there's a continuum. So you go from full-time to part-time, which is what's keeping the numbers up, from part-time to no ministry personnel, which is what's keeping the numbers up, and then to closure. So the fact that those are kind of saying the same aren't necessarily a positive thing.
There's a couple of comments in the chat, Trina.
Yeah, I just noticed those. Sarah's comment, I assume more children were being born per capita in 1992 than is projected for 2035. Yes, definitely. So that's also an important number to factor in there. And yes, there is definitely a reluctance for communities of faith to work together and change, which is ultimately what the call right now is to say, if we're going to continue the way we're going, which is not making those kinds of adjustments, then this is the future that we're facing. And so are we now experiencing a call to maybe look at it a little bit differently? But thanks for that comment, Ron. Next slide. So over to you, Kathy, to focus on British Columbia.
All right. So I'm going to go through some similar graphs, but looking really specifically at what's happening here in Pacific Mountain region. and in BC. We have, as Trina said, we've been going around the region and we've been using data even more specific to the regional areas. And I have all of those PowerPoints in my file. So if you're from the Fraser Valley or from the Kootenays or from the Okanagan and you didn't get a chance to go and you want to see your specific area, let me know. Today we're going to look at Pacific Mountain overall because there's people coming here from all over the region. I'm going to start with religion in BC. So this again is 1991, and you'll notice already in 91 in BC, the no religious affiliation was at 31%. If we remember back to Canada, 2021 is 39%. So BC, as many of us know, was already ahead of that curve in terms of people with no religious affiliation. United Church, though, was sitting at about 13% of the population in 91. You can see other significant pieces, the Catholic Church at 19%, the other Christian denomination at 16, and other faiths at 6. And then if we look at 2021, a huge increase in that no religious affiliation here in BC, and we see it at 52%. As we've been going around the province, we see actually in the rural areas that is even higher than that. Most of our rural areas are in the 60% no religious affiliation. One area we are in, it was at 75% no religious affiliation. The urban areas tend to have a smaller number in that, interestingly. But you'll also see here an increase also in other faiths at 14% and a slight decrease in the other Christian from 16% to 14%. And then looking again at the United Church, where we were at 13% in BC, down to 3%. And interesting to think about 1992, like why pick 1992? I'm not sure why exactly they picked it, but essentially it's one generation. I've talked to some ministers who are in their retirement year, and 1992 was the beginning of their ministry. So it's one career, it's one generation that we're looking at in terms of this data, which is puts it into perspective. We're going to again look through the membership numbers and the other statistics here in PMRC. So 1992, you can see 44,000. Dropped to 16,000. This is membership, total membership on the roll. And if we do nothing using the linear equation, they would go down to about 7,000 members here in Pacific Mountain. Attendance at worship, from 25,000 a generation ago to under 10,000 now, predicted down to 4,300 folks in 2035 attending United Church worship on a Sunday morning. Givers, similar trajectory. So from almost 30,000 givers in 92, 12,000 givers, less than half, down to 4,700 givers potentially supporting the congregations in 2035. Sunday school, again, it's a funny question. You need to ask more folks at National where they got that, where those 2,500 kids are, because that's pretty amazing. When I do the statistics, it pretty much zeroes out, where we had 13,000 kids in a Sunday school in 92, down to less than 2,000 and zeroing out. A question that often comes up here, I'm not actually, we can check the chat in a sec, but a thing that often comes up here is what's included in this statistic here. So this is based on those blue forms, or now it's on Church Hub, that you're filling out as a congregation. So when it asks you, participants in Sunday school, this is based on the number that congregations are putting in. The way the question is phrased, it is likely more people are putting in who is coming to Sunday school, the program that you're running during Sunday morning worship. It doesn't necessarily include all the things like summer camps or Camp Spirit or Campus United or all the other kinds of programs we're looking at. Little insight into how we measure things is how we tell a story. And I think that's one of the insights we're really learning is maybe we need to be looking at other measures besides just these measures. This is what we have, and it is telling us a story, multiple stories. Pastoral charges. So again, not as steep a decline here. And I've added in 2018 just to give us a bit more, what's happening. in our area. So 92, we had 220, and very interestingly, of those 220 pastoral charges, that's how it's noted, there was 301 preaching places. So many of those pastoral charges has multiple preaching places, and that included in 91, I think the Thomas Crosby was still going up and down the coast. So each congregation may have had a couple of preaching points. That number shifts a lot. So in 2018, 188 pastoral charges and 195 preaching points. So not only have we lost pastoral charges, but we've also decreased in the preaching points. In 2023, 155 pastoral charges and 166 preaching points. And if we continue as we are, we'd have about 100 pastoral charges in 10 years from now, 9 years from now. And I don't know what that means, probably 100 preaching points, I imagine that would look like. Deficits, slightly more than the national average. So in 92, there was 14% of congregations were in a deficit budget, 30% of congregations in a deficit budget 2024, and 61% projecting, using the national church's projection, 61 of congregations would be in a deficit in 2020, 2035. I'm going to go now to the ministry personnel because this one's a bit scary for folks. So if we look at the graph of full-time ministry, 174 full-time ministry positions in 92, that dropped down in 2018 to 109. By 2023, that dropped down to 87, and predicted here in Pacific Mountain, we'd have just over 50 full-time ministers in Pacific Mountain if we didn't do anything. You can see the interesting blip in the part-time ministry, where we had 174 full-time and 70 part-time ministers. You'll note many congregations had multiple staff, so they would have had a full-time minister and maybe a part-time minister working alongside. We saw a big drop in full-time ministry and an increase in part-time, and that would speak to the reality of many of our congregations where they went from full-time ministry to part-time ministry. And then now we're also seeing a drop in that part-time ministry. So as full-time ministry is going down, as part-time ministry is going down as well. And the no ministry personnel, these are congregations who don't have paid accountable ministry personnel. And it's using it's not including if you're just in a search, if you happen to be in a search when that census, or not census, when our stat form was done, looking at really if you were capable and had a position for a full-time ministry, that's what these numbers are showing. So 92, there was 14 communities of faith that didn't have ministry personnel. That went up to 26 in 2018, went up to 31 now, and projected that will go up to 38 communities of faith in Pacific Mountain that would not have paid accountable ministry if we continue on. All right. I'm just going to look quick at the chat here if there's anything, because I'm going to show a little bit closer in data. So it'd be great to have the PDF. Yes. So we're going to post this video with this recording so people can hear the commentary as well, and we will make the slides available for sure. And then Anne put the congregational conversation. So that's the national data. Yep. And we can put that info out as well. So then on the National Church website, you will find, actually it's some great resources on 2035, which we'll talk about at the end as well, but it includes all of the national data slides. Youth group statistic. Yes, that's one of the things I am hoping to do some work on this summer, is what other things that we can be looking at, campus ministry, camp spirit, like how are our kids engaging, messy church, how are our kids engaging, would be really important to look at. And some analysis. There's one more about analysis here. Oh, go ahead, Trina.
I was just going to encourage folks to put questions in there if they've got them or raise their hand.
Yeah, I think analysis is a part of this question for sure. As we look at the membership question, for example, knowing that generations now they don't belong to organizations through membership in the way that people did in the 90s and before. So membership is not going to be the way that people are going to want to engage with their communities of faith. And as we look at these next slides, you'll see that shift where we are actually seeing a decrease in membership and maybe not as much of a decrease in households under pastoral care, which is how our stat forms look at it. But what are other ways, what are other doors that people come in and are engaged with us as a community of faith? How do we look at those differently besides just membership?
Yeah, because the thing with membership is that in society generally people are not joining as members just for the sake of joining just for the sake of joining. Like that, the younger generations don't have the same relationship with or value for membership as say the boomer generation did. So the way that we are in relationship with people has to change. And this is true across beyond the church, like across all the charity sectors. This is a trend. So I was president of the Canadian Celiac Association, and during my term, we actually got like rid of membership because we couldn't count on membership as being the way to sustain the organization. And so the church hasn't sort of looked at that yet. So that I think is one of the things that we're actually being called to look at right now.
All right.
And we're
So,
adherence counted. It's just how it's reported on the stat forms. So I think the stat form just calls for official members.
yeah, it has official members and then it has another number called household under pastoral care. So again, that will be up to how congregations are understanding that number. It may be many congregations use their directory often for that, how many households are in our directory. But some clarification on that in our stats could be really helpful. So we're going to go a little bit closer in. So these are looking at stats now from 2019 to 2024. It's an interesting time period. That was the start of the new structure, loss of presbytery. That's an interesting factor. And of course, 2020 COVID. So this is showing us some of the statistics around COVID, what's happened and what's continuing to happen since then. And the reason it's 2024 is, as you do your stats, they're usually a year or so behind. We are going to be getting the 2025 stats out pretty soon, and we'll be able to update some of this data. So here's looking at Sunday attendance, and you can see, and this is across Pacific Mountain, there was a slight dip through COVID, and there has been a dip. It's increased a little bit, not up to what it was pre-COVID, but it'll be interesting to see that trajectory over a few more years. Though we compare that to church school members, so Sunday school, significant drop 2020, and then we have not seen that coming back up. And this might be your experience in your congregation, I think, where your Sunday school and your families stopped attending in COVID, and that's been difficult for that to come back up. This again, I was talking about the household versus member. So where you have the membership at a little bit steeper decline, number of households still declining, but starting to even out, and not as much of a decline as as total members. Just interesting to think about, again, what is this? What's the story that this might be telling about who we are as congregations, communities of faith? Some of the financial figures. So this is line 32A on your stats form, and this is the amount raised by congregations for congregational ministry. And you'll see that that declined a little bit, but has remained fairly steady, though the givers to expense, the number of people who are giving, is dropping. And I just find this so fascinating about how our people who are giving to the church are just giving more and more and more. Like we have very faithful, committed people, and they are giving more as the total number of givers is decreasing. And then this slide, 32B and 32C is other income. So where 32A is the amount from donations to the plate. This is looking at other ways that congregations and communities of faith have income. It might be through investment income. Most of it is coming in through our building rentals and fundraising and things like that. Uh, it's a funny kind of graph, the way it goes all over the place. And again, it's dependent on the statistics form. Sometimes a congregation will put a high number in there when they sell a building potentially, even though that's not necessarily income. So we see a bit of fluctuation here, but it does give us a sense of the about $13 million coming in yearly through other fat ways, like leases, rentals, investments, compared to what's that, about 19, 20 million. So we're still higher amounts coming in through our donations, though it's not that much different coming in through other ways. And then this graph, and it's the first one when I did the whole region where I actually got into the billions. Mostly we've been seeing millions. And this other property value is the amount that congregations, communities of faith have besides their property. So not including property like your land and your building. This is what is being held in investment accounts essentially across the region. And so in 2019, about $250 million in investment accounts in communities of faith. This isn't in the region's accounts. This is in the accounts of communities of faith, and about 0.2 of a billion, which is $210 million in investments that we're holding. So that's a big number. And that means, I think, a hopeful number in terms of like we have the resources and capacity to do some really interesting things if we work collectively and if we're paying attention to how we want to best use these resources. I did a little calculation. This was fast last night, so I'm not sure if it's accurate. But if we look at, the $33 million is kind of the operating cost of communities of faith right now, a total. So this, if we had no income coming in at all, this reserve would last us about 6 years. And looking at the amount of deficit we're carrying, if we had had the same amount of income coming in, the same amount of deficit, this would last us 716 years. So we're going to talk about the rainy day pretty soon, but we can decide again as communities of faith, how do we want to use our resources effectively for the ministry of our churches? So
There's
that's
a question
go
in
ahead.
the chat there, Kathy.
Yeah. Okay. Has anyone corrected the givings for the cost of living increases so it reflects much more? So we haven't done that corrections to the cost of living at this point, but it would be an interesting piece as well. But I don't have that data right now. Any other questions? We're going to ask you a question, but I don't know if anybody has other questions before we jump into another small group. No. So we're over the course of this 2 and a bit hours, we are taking us from this story of the generation of our church to what's been happening recently, and then we're going to be shifting gears into where do we want to go with this. But I want to pause here for a moment and just thinking about this last bit of data that we have shared. And you'll go back into your small group, and I'd love you to talk about surprises. Did anything surprise you out of the data that we've shared? What already confirms what you know? And what does it feel like as we tell this story of our current context? What does that feel like? So Mauricio, if you're good to put us back into our small groups, and I'll take these questions and I'll post them in the broadcast as well, and probably similar 5 or 6 minutes.
Kathy, if you throw them in the chat right now, then they'll go with them to their small groups.
Okay, is that better than in the broadcast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not everyone knows how to find the broadcast.
All right, so let me just do that then. I'm not set up for that yet.
Oh, I can type them in if you want.
Okay.
Thought you could just copy them off your slide.
Yeah. There we go.
And I'll open up the small groups.
Great. Oh, there was well, I'll come back to this question after. All right. Welcome back, everyone. We do want to hear back from some of the conversations you've had. I do want to just before we went on the break, Marie asked a question about the new ministries, church plants, and of course that has been a focus of Pacific Mountain for the past 10 years, is doing new initiatives and church plants. They wouldn't be included in the stats forms, and it is something that we want to be paying attention to. Rob because Rob's looking at, well, not looking, Rob's going to be moving. We're all not happy about that. They're happy in the East. I think there's been 17 to 19 different church plants over the past nine years that he's been doing it. They have shifted around. Some have moved into be part of a community of faith. Others have closed. We were doing lots of experiments, and right now I think there's 7 active church plants in the region right now, doing interesting things across the whole region. Lots on the island, up in the interior. But we want to be looking at that, absolutely. So I'd love to hear from you folks. Either you can put it in the chat or raise your hand. Was there anything that surprised you about this data, or does it confirm what you know? How does it feel? And if you raise your virtual hand, you'll pop up to the top of the screen if you have anything you want to add.
Or put anything in the chat. Oops, sorry.
I think of some of the things that have surprised folks in the few that we've done. We were all surprised at how dismal the stats were. YouTube. Oh, that's a good question, the YouTube piece, because that's come up a lot of times. And again, it's what people are recording on their stats forms. So if you're recording attendance at worship and including YouTube views, then that would be reflected here. If you're not recording it, it's not. And I think somebody said the new stat form does now have how many viewers are live, like a synchronous with your streaming. So the stats forms are slightly changing to reflect new realities of attending.
Yeah, and there has been a call to update the stats forms so that we're getting data that can be more useful to us as we start to think and plan for the future.
A sense of urgency. Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of this. What this data wasn't that we need to do it, like what worked in 1992 is not what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to look at what has changed in our world and what is changing in our church so that there is a sense of urgency to meet the world in a new way. All right. I'm going to show you a few more numbers. Honestly, my group seemed informed and not surprised, but agreed the membership isn't the best gauge. Absolutely. Yeah. We need to be looking at that. And this is again, we have this is where it may seem dismal. It also is this sense of opportunity here. We know the story that we're telling. What's a new story that we can be telling? So kind of hopeful. Yep. There you go. And hopefully that people are not affiliated. And we'll talk about, as we go into this next session, we will talk about that as well around affiliation, membership, what's the new way that people are engaging people who have that spiritual curiosity. Just want to watch the time too to make sure we get a little bit of a break. Maybe I'll do these next few slides and then we'll take a break. Trina, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do a share again because I'm going to help shift our gaze a little bit more. As we keep using that phrase, where are we shifting our gaze? And one of the interesting pieces of work I've been excited to do, and some of you may have heard me talk about this, is looking out into our communities. So where all of our statistics are looking inward, they're looking at, our membership, our worship attendance, our Sunday school, our givers. We need to shift what's happening outside of our walls. And so I'm going to show some examples of some of the data that we can be working and providing for communities of faith to help us look up, right? A little bit outside of our walls, what's happening in our communities, and then how is that reflected in our congregations? So we'll be asking that question too. Do we see ourselves reflected um, in our communities? Do we see our communities reflected in our communities of faith? So let me go back to the slide here. Okay. So I chose Jubilee because it's where the office is, and I chose a 10-minute driving distance. So you can see on the little map, this is 10 minutes from the office. And this would be just a snapshot of what's happening within that, so demographic. So in that area, there's about 228 thousand people. Average household size is 2.7. 77.6% of the people who live in this area are of a visible minority. There's 37 children. And I think there's a seniors part here, 38,600 people over the age of 65. It does give some stats on median income and how many people own their homes, Indigenous identity. This is an interesting one. There's 17.9% of families have a single parent in this area, which just seems big numbers. Again, you may or may not, like, this is not necessarily your community of faith, but giving you a sense of kind of how do we look a little bit beyond our walls. This is a snapshot so where we're looking at how is the church changing in 10 years, this is looking at how is our community around us changing between now and 2035. And just a few random things. So diversity index, the program I use does this. So 1 to 0 is the diversity index, with 100 being absolutely diverse, like every single person is a different person, mostly in terms of racial and ethnic identity, and 0 would be everybody is exactly the same. So the average for BC is about 40. That's their diversity index. In this area, 10 minutes around the office, it's 80. So a high diversity. And then you can also see the change in population, not huge. 1.2 is the annual growth rate. In some of our other areas, especially the rural areas in the North Island, I think we saw it at 1.8. So some areas are growing a lot faster. And the median income over here. So the orange bar is British Columbia and the gray bar is this particular area. So less than average in terms of the median income. Another interesting graph we can look at is community risk and equitability. And this is just looking at population here. I thought this was an interesting statistic. So of the people who are over 65, 9,000 people living within 10-minute drive of Jubilee are 65 years or older and living alone. We know loneliness is a huge issue in our communities, and that just strikes me. We see some other statistics here. So 77% of people are visible minority, but there's also 13% of those folks are visible minorities at risk, and they may be at risk because of housing precariousness, employment, language barriers, lots of factors that they factor in there. Somebody had asked, I think, Sarah, you asked about the children. So the average child per family household in this area is 1. So we are definitely seeing a decrease in that as well. And the average median age, 38. So again, if we're thinking about is our community reflected in our congregation? Is our congregation reflected in the community? I don't think any of our congregations could say they have a median age of 38. Maybe, but I don't think so. Religion, interesting. So I pull this up in some of our places, and always I have United Church showing up in the standard, top 10. In this area, United Church did not come up in the top 10. So I had to do a deeper dive. So in this area where we had, I think it was 3 or 4% across the province. What does it say here? Canada was 3%, British Columbia 2.5%. In this area, less than 1% of the people would identify as United Church. And then this would give you a bit of a snapshot of what religion looks like in this area, 10-minute drive, compared to BC. And you'll see the nones similar to what we've seen in a lot of our urban places, people with no religious affiliation, still high, but it's not as high in urban areas. And then I'm going to go to this slide. And I think many of you may remember when we did Environics and the Wonder Cafe and I can't remember what the whole Emerging Spirit project 15 years ago. Well, Environics is still doing social data, and we can access social data. Who are the people? How do they think? How do they act? What is important to them? What are their values? So this is a little quick snapshot of the area around the church, and the Prism data and Environics. I think they have 68 different segments, and in this area, 28% of folks would be in this segment called New Asian Heights, and I'll show you what that means in a sec, and then some of our other statistics which we've been seeing. But highest level here in terms of large diverse families, urban diversity, and urban fringe. And I'll explain a couple of those terms in a sec, but this just gives you a sense of this is who is living in the community surrounding Jubilee Church and the office. And this would be the New Asian Heights, so a little snapshot. And what I found so fascinating about this one hasn't come up in some of our other places, but a diverse segment, primarily younger, educated singles and couples living on the urban fringe, Vancouver, Toronto. And where was that piece? It prioritizes spending on meaningful experiences, from tech-friendly activities to food festivals to live performances, a keen interest in ethical consumption and social causes, motivated by opportunities that allow them to connect with others while staying true to their values. So this is 30% of the people who are living in the area around Jubilee would have social connection, values, ethical consumption as part of their values. And then these, again, random slides. There's lots of different slides, but this would show a little bit of the data that's coming up. So where folks like here would see their values in terms of diversity and inclusion and environment, and some of the things that many of our United Churches also care about. So it's like, where is there some confluence between the values that we hold in the United Church and our communities of faith and our communities around us, and how do we make those connections? Not to get people there necessarily on Sunday morning, but so that we can be part of a stronger, more vibrant community around us. All right. And maybe, I don't know that, maybe we won't go into a small group here, but we'll just have this question with all of us, and then we'll take a bit of a break. But I'm curious, as you look at your community data, so taking a step away from your community of faith and looking into your community around your church, where do you recognize yourself in the story of your community? Where does it not fit? And what feels hardest about being the church right now? And I'd love to hear either in the chat or, a couple of comments before we take a break. Do you see our churches? Where do we see our churches in our community? Or not? I'll do a stop share so we can see each other. Oh, hope. Yeah. So we're anxious to get to the hope. We know that. And I think it's important, like I think, when you having that tension between where we are at now and where we are hope is going to help us propel us to the hope. Any other
Of course,
thoughts?
Establishing that, I mean, part of the task of this is, well, that kind of tagline we've been using is data informed and spirit led. So how do we use this data to inform us? And then where from there is the spirit leading us? And so we do spend time on the data so that we have a clear sense of the picture, and that we do understand the urgency of making changes, and being willing to risk and experiment. And yes, we'll talk about that after the break.
All right. Does the United Church have enough courage to reach out to AI for advice on where to go and what to do? That's a,
Well,
I'll let Trina
I'll,
answer that one.
I'll bail you out, Kathy. Yeah, this is a big question, and one that the national church is going to be wrestling with. There's been a task group formed out of the last general council to take a look at the questions and the ethical concerns that are raised with AI, recognizing that AI is here, it's here to stay. So we can't stick our heads in the sand and just say, well, we're not going to use it. But how do we use it well? How do we use it ethically and safely? And then yes, the task group is going to be developing a policy for the national church, and then the region is also looking at this question as well. So I think, a big topic that we'll be spending some time working with over the course of the next couple of years. And yes, we'll be sharing the slides, and Kathy's done a beautiful job of analyzing the data in sort of what was all the former presbyteries across the region. And so that's already available, but you can also reach out to her to get data for your own community of faith in the fall. So she'll be off on sabbatical over the summer. National and the growth animators also have access to some of this as well. So if you need it urgently, you can let me know and we'll get it for you.
Do we have time to think about this? We have to think about this. We have to pray about this. We have to reflect on this. We have to work with our community of faith. Do we have time in the sense of 2035 is 9 years out now? So I think that's a real question.
But maybe the question is, do we have, I mean, I think we have to act. We can't just think, right? So, I mean, we're at the point where we do have to act and take some bold and daring approaches to things. We can't be necessarily invested in just keeping things the same.
And really think like it's the future orientation, and that's where we're going to come back after our break too, is where are we going to spend our energy? Let's start thinking and acting and engaging in a future and hopeful orientation. So should we take a 10-minute? That'll take us to 2:30, and that will then give us one more hour to do the second half of this. So why don't we stop now and come back in 10 minutes? Give yourself a Zoom break.
Welcome to Eastlink. Please tell me briefly what you need help with.
Good to see you again. So before the break, we were just kind of winding up with the data, and folks were wanting to start to think about how might we respond to all of this data. And so we're going to move into some of that kind of conversation now. So I'm just curious, how many of you have had someone say something to you like, I'm spiritual but not religious? Raise your hands. You've heard that. I am guessing that's most of you. So what that actually tells us is that people haven't stopped searching for meaning in their life. They're still seeking, they're looking for something. But what they have done is stop looking to the church as a place for answers. They've stopped assuming that the church is where that search happens. And that's a major shift over the course of a generation. For a long time, we as a church assumed that if people were spiritually curious, they would just find their way to us. But the data is now telling us the opposite. People are spiritually curious, but they no longer imagine that the church has anything to do with it. So instead of us thinking about how we get people back or how we get young people into the church, the question has to become, how do we become a place where we are spiritually visible in the world so that we can respond to that longing that exists in the world? How can we shift our ministries to be not thinking about how to save the church or get our numbers up, but shift the thinking to how do we respond to that need that exists in our neighborhood? What is it that our neighborhood and the surrounding areas actually need from us? How can we use the data to inform that so that we're able to respond to what the needs of the community are? How do we shift from being internally focused and be more externally focused in order to serve the world? What is really true is that the Spirit isn't waiting for us to figure it out. The Spirit's already at work. And what we're being called to do here is to shift our view, to train our eyes to see the more positive things that are growing up instead of focusing on grieving the things that we've lost. So the invitation is to stop managing decline and start noticing grace. So if this future that we've talked about is not the future that we want, what is our preferred future? What is it that we do want? So this is a statement that imagines what our preferred future might look like. So in 2035, we will be a resilient, inspired, diverse, and contextual united church made up of communities of disciples from coast to coast to coast, urban and rural. We will continue the story of Jesus by embodying God's presence in the world. In diverse expressions across the country, we will be contextual to our neighborhoods. We will be inspired communities that embody all aspects of the denominational call, which is deep spirituality, bold discipleship, and daring justice. We will be resilient communities that have sufficient stability and sustainability to prevent them from being just one or two crises away from closure. There would be a sense of having enough and being enough. I think this is really critical because I think one of the challenges that we face as a church is that we feel like we aren't enough because we focus so much on what we were rather than what we are. But what if we actually believed and acted and felt as if we were enough, that we had a real purpose and presence and reason for being in the community? Can you just imagine how that would feel? In 2035, being the United Church of Canada means better reflecting the increasing diversity of Canada, and the church will have a distinct Indigenous and Francophone presence, and it will include the presence of all generations, notably children, youth, and young adults. So what this is telling us is that the future of the church isn't about size. It's about depth, it's about connection and sustainability. And what's really important is that we have clarity of purpose so that we know what our call and purpose is, and so that we can be really clear and focused on that, develop a ministry plan, and work towards a goal that we have set and know we want to achieve. So when you hear our regional staff asking you about your ministry plan, the thing is we're doing that because we're trying to help you be really clear about your purpose. Because as leaders in communities of faith, in order to be able to lead effectively, in order to be able to offer ministry to the community, you have to know what you're trying to achieve. And that's why the ministry plan is so critical. So when you feel frustrated with the region about having to do a ministry plan in order to do the thing that you want to do, that's why. It's to help you feel and help you to get clear and to be able to clearly articulate what that call is. Jillian.
I just wanted to point out two specific types of things that have changed our church. May I talk about them?
Mm-hmm.
One of them is food. And it's not just food feeding us, but food that's needed in the community. So we're doing breakfast at a school that is low income school. We're doing breakfast for those children. And then we're also doing Starfish Pack program. And we're 155 students that our volunteers put together once a week. And those are big places for volunteers to come that don't belong to the church. And then a whole bunch of people joined the church once they helped with us. And the second big sense of what we do, and it has helped with growth, we're an affirming church, but I think it's true for the United Churches of being welcoming of queer people, that the number of families that get booted out of other churches and are now at our churches with their children who are intersex and have not able to choose what gender they are. Plus, we also have many people from many other countries who've been booted out of their countries that are now in our church. Pakistan, Iranian, Syria, because they're queer. And then, so our church is growing because we are affirming and because we deal with food.
Great, thank you. So those are good examples of clarity of purpose, things that you're wanting to achieve, and recognizing that one of the things we have to be aware of is that we can't do everything. And as the churches are smaller, I think we're all trying to do everything and be all things to all people. So a recognition is that we may need to pick one or two things and just be really good at those things. But that's not to say that you just keep doing the same things that you're doing, just try harder and do it better. That's not what this is about. It's about discerning what your call is and really putting energy into what your call is. Margaret Wheatley says that there's nothing greater than a community discovering what it cares about. And if you have a community of faith that is coalesced around the vision, you'll have energy, excitement, and people will be drawn to that community and want to be part of it. Not just to make it survive, but for it to thrive. And that's really important. There's a question around the Francophone community goals. Emma, I wonder if you could just clarify a little bit what you're asking there in the chat, or unmute yourself. But the next question, Kathy, do you want to respond around the resources we have available around ministry plans?
Yep, absolutely. So check in with your regional minister for sure. We have a two resources. One is a simplified version of a ministry plan that talks about what a ministry plan is and a very simple template. It's so contextual. That was one of the questions too. What do you mean by contextual? Each ministry is going to be unique. So this gives a simple template. And then we have a more expansive resource with a whole number of tools for each of the areas of your ministry plan. It would have a tool on creating vision, creating action plans, setting goals, writing it up, doing evaluation and review. So those two resources are available to communities of faith, as well as your regional minister to help you out with those as well. I don't know if you've seen those, Jen, or not, but yeah, the 5-pager and the 65-pager.
And with respect to Emma's question, there's a whole unit in the General Council office that focuses on Francophone ministries. Their work is largely in the eastern regions where there's a greater French population, so that hasn't carried out into the west, into our regions very much. But there's all kinds of resources. There's an organization called La Table, which is the Francophone communities of faith, kind of a separate council that they're part of, and that supports their goals and ministry plans around that. And contextual is about recognizing that we're a wide and diverse country. So not every, like what our needs are in Pacific Mountain region are quite different than what the needs are in Newfoundland or in Ontario or in other places. So our solutions can't be one size fits all or cookie cutter solutions. We have to be nimble and responsive, so that we can offer the ministries that we're being called to within our particular area to respond to the particular needs that exist here. So just trying to be relevant in creative and new ways. Another important aspect of this is around working together and recognizing that we can do this well, but we have to do it together. So working together, having the region support the work of communities of faith, talking to our neighbors, those kinds of things. So Jillian's got a bit of a jump on us here, but where are you seeing spiritual curiosity? Where do people gather? And when does your community feel most alive? So what we're trying to do here is train our eyes. So how do we train our eyes to see those new and exciting things that are happening here? So we'll invite you again to talk to each other for a few minutes about some of those exciting initiatives and the spiritual curiosity that you're encountering in your work.
I'll open up the breakout rooms for 5 minutes.
So I'm going to invite you just to feed a couple of reflections into the chat. Where are you seeing spiritual curiosity?
There's a hand up.
Jillian?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes.
Spiritual curiosity, a lot of it happened about affirming and queer people in the churches. And then that film came out 2 years ago called 1946, which talks about the fact that the word homosexuality was never in the Bible until 1946, when the people translating put it all in. And then since then, translations have removed problems for being queer of any sort. So that was a teaching thing in 1946, was presented at many, many of the churches all around Lower Mainland that I know about. And that opened it up to more people to come to the church. That's one answer to your question, Trina.
Thank you. And we're hearing centering prayer. Getting together over food and just noticing the implications of social media. Gatherings around food, common thread we've heard today. Community events in the church. An upcoming Empowering Voices conference during Pride Weekend in Port Moody. Seeing it in kids and university students. At Sunday school or life groups where people can meet, not in a certain space or building, but having met where they are. "1947 is a great example. Had lots of non-church people coming. Great, and you can keep feeding those in there as you wish. But let's just give ourselves a moment to think about what might we actually have to stop doing if we're going to focus or if we're going to specialize. What might we be being called away from? So I'm not going to put you in small groups, but invite you just to put your thoughts into the chat there. The scarcity mindset, absolutely. It's I think the narrative of decline is pervasive. But when, one of the other things the data tells us is that we do have resources available to us. And maybe we've been saving for a rainy day and it's time to look out the window and notice that it's pouring. The trying to do all things, thinking church only happens on Sunday morning, hoarding resources. This is how we've always done it, mindset and stronghold. So if you're going to go away from here today and say, I have been thinking of an idea and I'm going to try something new, what might that be? So what is one small or big experiment that you could try in the next year? So we're seeing some partnerships suggesting thinking outside the box as to what church and Sunday school needs to look like, be open to new. Jillian.
Well, it's interesting. I ran into Tsawwassen United Church this morning for the first time, and the building outside was surrounded by places where families could be together and families could have meals together, and they do have family times, like once a month. For example, this Sunday, I'm going to the church there for the first time, but then I'm also going to the get together in the afternoon. So that's something that I'm going to suggest to United Churches of Langley.
Thank you. I liked someone's suggestion of food outreach, lunch boxes for kids, outreach to parents and families, making them a priority. Thanks, Emma. I can tell you that Pamela Evans, who is a lead of our First Third ministry, and I'm sure Sarah, who's one of our animators, also online here, would say that they believe that that's a core tenet to the success of the future church, is to really focus on family and having that be a core piece of the work that we do together. Experimentation, try something, and if it doesn't take, let go and try something else. Absolutely, fail forward. I think that's a really critical piece. So we're really wanting to invite you to think about the future in new and different ways. As I said, to train your eyes to look at things differently, and you can continue to pop some ideas in the chat, because your ideas might percolate for someone else. But Kathy is going to lead us through another exercise about thinking about the future.
So one of our hopes, this is the start of some conversations, is part of our hope today, and part of our road trip that we've been doing, so that we can imagine a future for the United Church in new and exciting and bold and creative and collaborative ways. So I'm going to just lead us through, again, another way to come at this question. It's a hard nut to crack, so we want to come at it from a lot of different ways. So I'm going to just invite you, as you've imagined the data that we've been looking at, the community that we've been imagining, the question about what you might stop, the question about what small experiment you might try, and I'm going to invite you into some imagining. And you're going to do this in yourself, and then we're going to actually have some opportunities to share some of this as well. But I want you just to take a moment, take a breath, and I want you to imagine that it's 2035 right now. So imagine it's 2035 and your congregation is flourishing. It's not the same as it was in 2025, but it's alive in a way that feels faithful and hopeful. Something has shifted. Something new has taken root. The people in the community around the church know that the church is here, and they're grateful for it. Okay, so put yourself there. And I want you to really go a little deeper into this. Imagine somebody comes up to you and they say, "What happened here? How did your congregation find new life?" So put yourself in 2035. Look around. What do you see? Who's present as you look around? What are people doing? What's happening in your building? Imagine yourself walking through your building in 2035. What's happening in your building? How is the community around you experiencing the church? And as you're walking through the space, or walking through your neighborhood, what's feeling spiritually alive? And I'd love to hear, if any little inkling, I'd love to hear some of these moments. What are you seeing? What's happening? Who's present? You can put it in the chat, or if you want to speak it out, that will be wonderful as well. You're still assuming the church is in a building. Yeah, maybe it's not. So what are you imagining? Tell me the vision. What's happening? And we're in 2035. We've jumped 10 years ahead. Where are you? If gathering. My dream is to have a church full of kids to dance and sing and play with. Dream of enough kids so the parents have groups running out of the church where they can have a break. Break bread together. Actually, I even say break ice where we can have a break, but break bread together and sing songs. So people are imagining children. So those
Sounds
children who
like
are now
loud children in that capacity, which is lovely.
Yeah. And teenagers, so the children who are here now, you've watched them grow up into teenagers and they're still connected and they're bringing their friends. Flourishing is being imitators of Christ in small yet significant ways.
And
Being
it's important,
11. Yeah.
it's important to think about the church being there for the people, not the people being there for the church. That's what I vision.
Volunteers from around the community are engaged. Nice. So as you're imagining in this 2035 scenario, and as we're dreaming and as we're letting go of things and we're trying experiments, we want to talk about the support as well that can come alongside you. And maybe Trina, you can jump in here about what's the region for?
Thank you. Our role is as the region is to be, I mean, we have obviously particular functions under the governance structure, but our whole purpose of existing is to support communities of faith. So the work that we focus on are the three goals that we have identified: healthy communities of faith, effective public leadership, and faithful public witness. So the region only exists for the good of communities of faith and their leaders. So we play a coordinating role, a support role. We offer resources through our staff and grants and various different ways. But it's to support, to encourage, and particularly to support experimentation and collaboration in this time. Well, what some of the ways forward that are so important involve working with our neighboring communities of faith, not believing that we need to do it all by ourselves. One of the things that need to shift is a sort of congregationalist identity, and it's one of our roots, congregationalism. But we need to lean more into our Methodism and connectionalism to work together to achieve the greater priorities of the church. And so to start thinking beyond the one congregation. So an example I often give is there's a geographical area in one of my regions where there are no ministry personnel. And so how do we put the resources of those 4 or 5 congregations together to find a way to offer support to the lay folks that are leading the churches in those 5 areas? So what are some new and creative ways that we're able to offer those kinds of support? Our job as a region is not to tell communities of faith who or what to become, but to walk with you and offer support and resources as you do that. And of course, one of the key ways that we do that is through our staff and leadership programming that supports leaders, because having healthy and effective leaders translates into healthier and more flourishing communities of faith.
Yeah. Being one of the staff that support communities of faith, I also pay a lot of attention to what we're noticing and we spend a lot of time listening with and congregations. And this is the thing that we're hearing most right now. We're hearing that there's a real strong desire for connection. With the shift to the model of regions and communities of faith, there is longing for that connection that used to happen at Presbytery, particularly the community, local neighborhood connection. So there's a desire for connection. We're also hearing a resilience in the church. That's bringing a lot of hope. There's a tiredness, absolutely, in that resilience, but there is a faithfulness and a resilience that is happening. And I think someone had said this earlier in this session today too. There is a real openness to try new things. I'm seeing that more and more in congregations. Even in the exhaustion, I think we've kind of like, okay, enough already. We'll try the new thing, which is very exciting as well. And the things that regional ministers, what we're getting asked for support. So we're trying to figure out how to do this at scale as well. How do we support communities of faith? What are communities of faith specifically asking for? And this is the work that we're doing in the team, and hopefully you can reach out, and we'd love to do this work with you too. But the question of how do we reach out into the neighborhood? So we talked today about, engaging the community. We've looked at some data, but congregations are asking, like, how do we do that? How do we reach out? How do we create partnerships? What are some ways that we can do that formally and informally? So we want to come alongside congregations, communities of faith that are doing that. How do we have an increased connection with our neighboring United churches as well? Not just in community groups, that's a huge piece, our partnerships, but we also, how do we increase connection with neighboring United churches? When we did the model change, we talked a lot about networks and clusters, and there's been different ways that has happened throughout the region. Sometimes the lingo stumbles us a bit, but we want to dive deeper into that. What does it mean to be more connected as United Church and connected to our community? And then two other really critical things, I think, for this vision that we are being asked about and we want to be supporting. How do we be intergenerational? And we've got the first third. I'll talk about that in a sec more specifically, but congregations are asking, what does it mean to be intergenerational? And what does it mean to be intercultural? I think that's a really important part of this conversation. When we looked at the stats from Jubilee, 10-minute drive, and it's an 80% visible minority population of folks that are young and wanting to engage in their community and have strong social values. And it's like, our churches, how do we engage in an intercultural way as a church that's more reflective of our communities? Oops. So some real specific projects that are happening, and some of this are happening urban and some of it's happening more rurally. We are looking at doing a mutual ministry pilot project. And this is more of a rural experiment where we are gathering communities of faith that don't have ministry personnel or have very limited, maybe they have, 5 or 10 hours a week of ministry personnel. And how do we work more collectively to in my imagining of this, it's 15 congregations, 15 to 18 congregations with 2 or 3 dedicated full-time staff supported by the region who are working with those congregations, not as a circuit rider, but as a leader to help congregations understand what's their unique context, what's their ministry, and then help to build up the capacity to engage that ministry. But doing it from a position of being full-time as well. So instead of having, 3 congregations each with either no or very, very minimal ministry personnel, how do we work together so that we can have fully engaged full-time ministry personnel who are committed to the work and the vocation of that? First Third is a huge piece of the work we're doing here in the region. This region has put a lot of resources and commitment into that first third. Pamela's talked about some of the projects that have happened there. She was just up here yesterday, actually. We were working in the North Okanagan about doing a collective first third project with the congregations up here. It was very exciting to be part of that conversation. We had every congregation in the North Okanagan present at that conversation, leaders, ministers, board members, to talk about how can we do this collectively. Campus ministry, amazing things happening with animators on the campuses talking to the students. Look, food security issues, vocational questions, spiritual longing. So having folks engaged on campuses and present to students to talk about that kind of thing. And then really a whole lot of, I won't go into the list, but a whole lot of collective and collaborative ministry experiments that have happened. Shared ministry, ecumenical ministry, sharing a minister, sharing resources and programming. So these are the things that we are doing, and I think the opportunities for doing some experimentation. Looking if there's a couple of different congregations and denominations are coordinating to have lunches each day to battle the isolation as well as the food issues, food security, and we're seeing that more, and we will see that more and more. Food prices are going up tremendously. What's the role of us and our churches in meeting that need? I think that is one of our calls. It's a gospel call there too.
We're also having some partnerships and conversations with congregations and their leaders from other denominations who are migrating into Canada and wanting to become affiliated with the United Church, still maintain connection with their own denomination, but to be affiliated and have community within the context of Canada. So that's a really interesting and exciting opportunity for us as well. So we've got some partnerships with some, in particular, United Methodist communities of faith, and so that'll be really exciting to see what it unveils for the future.
Yeah. And how it helps to shape us as a denomination as well, to engage in those conversations and community. I think somebody put this link in there. It is a great resource that's available on the United Church of Canada website for if you want to take this conversation into your community of faith. So it has the slides and the data, but it also has some prayer resources and a full outline for a workshop that you can lead locally, maybe in a cluster or in your congregation, to do some deeper dives into this work.
Indeed. There's all the regional ministers are also happy to work with you around this information, and there'll be more future opportunities as we lean into what the next steps will be around engagement with this work.
Absolutely. I think I did talk about the first third things. They've got some kind of cool. There's one called Sanctuary D&D. We were talking about this yesterday when we were meeting up in the north. I think it's based out of Calgary, I believe, but it's a D&D group of young adults engaging on Discord, and some exciting community happening there. The Lethbridge pilot that's going on, where 4 congregations have come together, and they're playing pickleball with seniors. So Baz is out in that area connecting with youth and then connecting youth intergenerationally as they and then I think there's a pizza guy who comes every time too, who's engaged in that too. So you can come and have pickleball and you can have pizza. And it's creating community.
Yeah, that is 4 communities of faith who've actually hired an animator to serve the 4 communities of faith. And pickleball is one of their activities, and one of the members of the community of faith, a Dr. Pizza, they call her. She buys them pizza every week at their pickleball games. So it's so they refer to her as Dr. Pizza. But it's created this really lovely intergenerational experience and relationship, and she shows up and watches them every week, and she's a medical doctor. That's why they call her Dr. Pizza.
Yeah.
It's a really, really great initiative, because those 4 communities of faith were not in the habit of working together. And so they broke down those barriers in coming together around this position. And now the youth from all of the different communities of faith come together every week. But it's also creating connections with the individual communities of faith too. So it's a really beautiful thing.
And what we're realizing too, like especially youth and young adults, it's relationship first. And that's a key part of this. So if there's a relationship, then those deeper conversations can happen, which people are longing for. But it does start with relationship.
Sanctuary D&D
Oh,
is
so the Shaughnessy. Oh, you're right. It is through Shaughnessy. Yeah.
it's
But
it's
I think it's
housed in Shaughnessy, but it's actually funded by a Provision grant, and Ben Dobbins is leading that, and it's an initiative that's supported and overseen by the region.
so I'll just put up some more information if you want to hear more about First Third. You can check out their website. They've got some great resources on their website and their email there as well. So we're getting close to the end. I don't know if we want to just open it up if there's any final questions that folks have.
I have a question, and I'm sorry if I checked out when something was mentioned, but is anybody talking about support for redeveloping buildings anymore?
Yes, absolutely. We have a sort of department at the region that focuses on that. So Don Evans is the lead staff person, and then we have a committee structure that supports that. And so, yeah, that's absolutely still available. And actually, Gordon United, I've asked Don to make it a priority to be in touch with you folks.
Okay. What about the United Church of Canada? They had a program that was more deeply involved and would provide project management, that sort of thing. Is that all gone?
So we do that in the region. National does have a program, but it's changed quite a bit, and it's working with a not for profit, well, a for-profit organization that was formed out of the United Church called Kindred Works. And then we have an arm that is directly connected at National called UCRD. But they haven't actually done any work in these regions too much because they're very busy and they're at capacity, and we have our own system. So we just work together with them. So generally it's happening through us, but if you'd prefer to work with UPRC, you can do that as well. But they're just not as yeah, they just haven't made most of their projects are in Ontario.
I'm not involved in that. I know that that's been Don Evans is one of the people that our group in Gordon United has talked to over the years, but it just seems to me that the activity has slowed down or stopped. And I can't imagine 10 years from now still propping up the building that we have.
Yeah, fair
Because
enough.
it pretty much takes all of our resources.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, your area, your community of faith is one that's sort of on the prioritized list. We recognize the urgency around that matter, but the challenge that we have around redevelopment of properties right now is the economy. So because of the increased cost of development, supply chain issues, interest rates, and a lack of funding from the government, redevelopment at the moment is kind of challenging, but we're continuing to keep our eye on the sort of funding opportunities. And as soon as the government is able to open up some of those things specifically around housing, we'll be in a position, hopefully, to be able to respond more quickly. So that's what Don's work is right now, is kind of doing the groundwork around what might be possible when funding is more accessible to us. Right now, there's just no government funding programs that we can access as church organizations.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Right. Well, I'll leave with you with a couple of questions as we're getting near the end. And this will be part of the slides that come out. But another way to think through this is if you were starting your congregations from scratch today in your town with your people, the people who actually live in your community, what would you do first? So when you go back to that, what's the experiment we want to try? If we had a blank slate and we were starting from scratch, what would we do first? And then really thinking outside of your congregations, what are our neighbors carrying right now? And what might God be asking the church to carry with them? And then we have this data, again, data informed, spirit led, but how could we imagine using some of this data to inform and support our ministry vision? So I do want to leave those with you as ways to continue this conversation in your congregation, community of faith, cluster, and again, as a region, how do we continue this conversation? Absolutely.
And as we end our time together, I do encourage you, if you haven't, to read through the notes in the chat. It's great. There's lots of really good stuff in there. And let us wind up our time as we began our time with the word from Scripture, I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. And let us join together, reminding ourselves that we do not need to do this work alone. We are not alone. We live in God's world. We believe in God who has created and is creating, who has come in Jesus, the Word made flesh, to reconcile and make new, who works in us and others by the Spirit. We trust in God. We are called to be the church, to celebrate God's presence, to live with respect in creation, to love and serve others, to seek justice and resist evil, to proclaim Jesus crucified and risen, our judge and our hope. In life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us. We are not alone. Thanks be to God. Amen. So if you were too shy to ask questions, we'll hang around here. We'll turn the recording off and hang around here. And if you want to ask questions, you can do that. But